Chapter 21. Augustus Waters died 8 days after his pre-funeral at Memorial in the ICU when the cancer, which was made of him, finally stopped his heart, which was also made of him. He was with his mom and dad and sisters. His mom called me at 3:30 in the morning. I'd known, of course, that he was going. I talked to his dad before going to bed, and he told me it could be tonight. But still, when I grabbed the phone from the bedside table and saw Gus's mom on the caller ID, caller ID, everything inside of me collapsed. She was just crying on the other end of the line, and she told me she was sorry, and I said I was sorry too. And she told me that he was unconscious for a couple hours before he died. My parents came in then, looking expectant, and I just nodded and they fell into each other, feeling, I'm sure, the harmonic terror that would in time come for them directly. I called Isaac, who cursed life and the universe and God himself, and who said where are the goddamn trophies to break when you need them. And then I realized there was no one else to call, which was the saddest thing. The only person I really wanted to talk to about Augustus Waters' death was Augustus Waters. My parents stayed in my room forever until it was morning, and finally Dad said, "Do you want to be alone?" And I nodded, and Mom said, "We'll be right outside the door." Me thinking, I don't doubt it. It was unbearable. The whole thing, every second worse than the last. I just kept thinking about calling him, wondering what would happen, if anyone would answer. In the last weeks, we'd been reduced to spending our time together in recollection, but that was not nothing. The pleasure of remembering had been taken from me, because there was no longer anyone to remember with. It felt like losing your co-rememberer meant losing the memory itself, as if the things we'd done were less real and important than they had been hours before. When you go into the ER, one of the first things they ask you to do is to rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10. And from there they decide which drugs to use and how quickly to use them. I've been asked this question hundreds of times over the years, and I remember once early on when I couldn't get my breath and it felt like my chest was on fire. Flames licking the inside of my ribs, fighting for a way to burn out of my body. My parents took me to the ER. A nurse asked me about the pain, and I couldn't even speak, so I held up 9 fingers. Later, after they'd given me something, the nurse came in and she was kind of stroking my hand while she took my blood pressure, and she said, "You know how I know you're a fighter? You called a 10 a 9, but that wasn't quite right. I called it a 9 because I was saving my 10, and here it was, the great and terrible 10, slamming me again and again as I lay still and alone in my bed staring at the ceiling. The waves tossing me against the rocks, then pulling me back out to sea so they could launch me again into the jagged face of the cliff, leaving me floating face up on the water, undrowned. Finally, I did call him. His phone rang 5 times and then went to voicemail. "You've reached the voicemail of Augustus Waters," he said, the clarion voice I'd fallen for. "Leave a message." It beeped. The dead air on the line was so eerie. I just wanted to go back to that secret post-terrestrial third space with him that we visited when we talked on the phone. I waited for that feeling, but it never came. The dead air on the line was no comfort. And finally I hung up. I got my laptop out from under the bed and fired it up and went on to his wall page, where already the condolences were floating in. The most recent one said, "I love you, bro. See you on the other side." Written by someone I'd never heard of. In fact, almost all the wall posts which arrived nearly as fast as I could read them, were written by people I never met and whom he'd never spoken about. People were extolling his various virtues now that he was now that he was dead, even though I knew for a fact they hadn't seen him in months and had made no effort to visit him. I wondered if my wall would look like this if I died, or if I'd been out of school and life long enough to escape widespread memorialization.